Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's first edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyam Vogo, and on the show tonight,
our ultimate objective is to achieve long-term energy security so that we never have to experience electricity shortage again.
President Cyril Ramaphosa and his government, the main objects of criticism as the Eskom crisis spirals out of control. Former DA leader Mmusi Maimane re-enters the political ring with a firm focus on becoming the country's next president. We talked to him about his plans, how he is going to settle his ambitions' debt. That's what's coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. Eskom says rolling blackouts will be downgraded to 5 from midnight. The rotational power cuts are escalated to stage 6 yesterday as the power utility struggled with power generation. For many ordinary South Africans, those hours without electricity often impede their ability to work. Some have taken to social media to express their frustrations.
For several hours a day, the electricity supply is switched off in some part of South Africa. On Sunday, the country was plunged into stage 6 rolling blackouts, while the rolling blackouts in various stages have been rolled out for 3 weeks now. Frustration, anger and disillusionment abound as people around the country endure yet another period of costly power rations.
This thing is just, it's a setback for every one of us. Worse as a black poor people, because of come to think of it, you wake up, there's no electricity, water, how are you going to start a day?
It's really very bad, I must say. Someone with health issues, because now it's like you have to wait certain times to bath and to clean your wounds, because I'm going through a healing process.
It's really affecting me deeply because we know that this could have been preventable, and this is a very good example of mismanagement of funds.
Labour Federation COSATU says it's disappointing and unfair to taxpayers to be subjected to regular power cuts.
We call on South African government to really take this issue seriously. It is totally unacceptable that South Africans are being asked to pay for something that is not there. The fact that Eskom is asking for more money at the same time, South Africans are being forced to look for alternative energy sources is really scandalous and criminal.
On social media, South Africans sought for government to attend to the rolling blackouts. One political analyst says the unstable electricity supply is eroding public confidence in the government.
The issue of not having power in your home for extended periods of time could become a very, very powerful political weapon for the opponents of the ANC, and can also be used ultimately by the opponents of President Ramaphosa also to point to a lack of leadership, or at least a lack of being able to get a grip on the energy crisis that prevails.
Recent data from Stats SA shows the negative effect of power cuts on the economy. South Africa's GDP recorded a 0.7 contraction in the second quarter. Business leaders say power cuts continue to add to the already dire economic difficulties faced by South Africans.
South Africa is in 2022 on course for its worst levels of load shedding in well more than a decade. And of course, when combined with the cocktail of high inflation, high interest rates and weakness amongst our international trading partners, that too then portends poorly for economic performance in the remaining segment of this year and through the early parts of 2023.
All the promises that they've made up until now, 4 or 5 years now, they have not actually been fulfilled. So that is a very scary situation to see. And it has a very, very serious impact on job creation, on trying to turn around this economy. So the whole program of government around reconstruction and renewal is up in the air at this point in time.
Eskom says there have been breakdowns at various power stations over the past few weeks. It says the national power grid is under immense pressure and is struggling with funds to buy diesel. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Political parties are demanding answers regarding the implementation of the National Energy Plan announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa in July. This as the country is again plagued by rolling blackouts, which were cranked up to stage 6 this past weekend. While some have welcomed the president cutting short his visit to the United States to come and deal with the crisis, others see it as merely a publicity stunt which will yield very little.
Almost 2 months after President Cyril Ramaphosa announced an emergency energy plan to put an end to stage 6 load shedding, the country is once again suffering. At the time, Ramaphosa announced a raft of measures to solve the crisis.
Our ultimate objective is to achieve long-term energy security so that we never have to experience electricity shortage again. We aim to do this by stabilizing Eskom and improving plant performance, establishing a competitive electricity market, opening the way for private investment in new generation capacity and increasing our investment in renewables.
Ramaphosa was due to address the United Nations General Assembly in New York this week after attending the funeral of the late Queen Elizabeth in the UK, says he will now return home. It's a decision welcomed by the DA.
This is in response to a call from the DA over the weekend requiring the president to inform the nation of the action steps and progress made since he announced his energy emergency response plan on 25 July. The DA remains concerned that the National Electricity Crisis Committee is still unaccountable to Parliament and calls on the Speaker of the National Assembly to take immediate action for this committee to report on its key milestones and deliverables.
These views are echoed by the Good Party, which has called for greater transparency on Ramaphosa's part.
The energy supply instability that South Africa has endured for 15 years. What we really need is to see action in implementing that plan, and we need regular feedback from the president so that we can hold his government and the government of South Africa accountable to implement those plans. So while the president returning to South Africa is a symbolic gesture, we need it to be more than a symbolic gesture. We need a report back on what has happened since the 25th of July announcement.
The EFF and the ATM are, however, unconvinced anything will come of Ramaphosa's latest efforts.
For one, as the EFF, we've always said that this power crisis is deliberate. So we want to drive home that point once again, that this is a deliberate power crisis.
This is not the first time the nation will remember. 2019, he did the same thing when he was in Egypt, cutting short the trip to address the stage 6 issue, where he told us that there was a sabotage. And to this day, we don't even know where is that matter. So to us, it's just a publicity stunt that the president is engaging himself in.
The leader of the Freedom Fund Plus, Peter Groenewald, says the commitment to employ experienced former employees of Eskom as contained in the energy plan has not happened.
There are many people, previous employees of Eskom, who already came forward, who is willing to help and assist to try and solve the problem. But there is too much politically interference with the matter because of affirmative action.
Some believe that a solution can be reached if South Africa's leaders can put their heads together.
We also wish to recommend that the president, upon his arrival, must ask the speaker to convene an agent joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces so that there are solutions that are debated and we find a common ground in terms of how we deal with the electricity issue in South Africa.
President Ramaphosa is expected to touch down the country late on Monday. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, a united front of unions and social movements have come together to propose alternative ways to address both the immediate and longer-term challenges of the country's energy system. On the line to talk about that, I have Dominic Brown from the Alternative Information Development Center, who are the conveners of the initiative. And here in studio, I have Trevor Shaku from the South African Federation of Trade Unions, one of the union federations that form part of the initiative. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, and thanks for having us.
Let me start with you, Dominic, if I may. Explain to us how the initiative came about in the first instance.
So, thanks for having us. The initiative came about in light of government's proposals to deal with the load shedding crisis. We convened trade unions across various federations, as well as independent trade unions, as well as social movements, to come to terms with the energy crisis in the country and evaluate government's responses to the energy crisis, and to see what is a common response that we can develop together. And we felt that government's proposals are largely inadequate, but we can get into that details in a moment, I hope.
Trevor, you decided to form part of this bloc that's looking at possible solutions. Why?
We think that the South African government is actually failing the people, but also has taken advantage of the demobilization of the working class organizations across the country since 1994. The student movement has been demobilized politically. The trade union movement itself has been demobilized. The community and civic organizations have been demobilized. So we thought that we should forge a united front of these great movements of the working class, through which we will obviously form a bloc that can wage a fight back against the failures of government, and not just only in fighting load shedding, but also in other areas of our governance in this country.
Dominic, what are you putting on the table as alternatives to what we are experiencing?
So, I mean, in the first instance, we agree that we need to deal with the load shedding crisis urgently, recognizing the huge costs that it has on the economy, socially, on our healthcare, etc. And as looking at this, we think we must look at the facts, and we see that there's an energy gap of about 6 gigawatts. This is how much the electricity shortfall between how much is being produced and how much is being demanded is currently. And for us, looking at this, the quickest and most effective way to increase the energy supply is to fix Eskom and to restore the existing fleet. And there's approximately 19 gigawatts of unplanned or planned outages at Eskom due to maintenance and servicing problems. And given this is especially important given how the private sector will not be able to bring sufficient electricity onto the grid quickly enough. And this is exemplified in the fact that, just by way of an example, bid window 5 of the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program is expected to only get about 1 gigawatt of capacity on the grid by sometime next year, out of a total of potentially 2 gigawatts of electricity. And that other extra gigawatt, or 0.95 gigawatts, will only be possible if they dramatically reduce the localization requirements, how much of the inputs needs to be sourced locally. And so this doesn't even take into account the fact that this, the renewable energy that's coming onto the grid, and don't get me wrong, we need to transition to renewables, but renewable energy is not a like-for-like comparison to energies produced from other sources. So, for example, given intermittent and variable energy from renewables, it has a capacity factor. This is how much energy it actually produces over time, not how much it can produce in theory, is at best around 25 to 30%, whereas coal, even in some of the worst case scenarios, is around 65%. So at least you need twice as much renewable energies to replace every 1 unit of coal. And so this 1 gigawatt that will come on board by sometime next year through the bid window 5 of the REAP is really equal to about 0.3 gigawatts, not even a half a gigawatt. There's also additional problems in relation to private embedded in generation, but I think we can get there in a bit. So the bottom line is to circle back. To deal with the energy crisis, which is an urgent emergency, we have to fix Eskom, which has 19 gigawatts of capacity that can be restored, of which we need 6 very quickly. And to do that, we need to really intensify the maintenance and liberate the resources to invest in the maintenance of the existing fleet.
Tara, I mean, the reality that Dominic has just painted, when both government and Eskom say they're actually alive to that reality, and part of the efforts that they're engaged in are meant to actually address those shortcomings. So in other words, it's not for lack of trying. Or do you differ with them on that?
We absolutely differ with them. We think, in the first place, the main drive for the people who are currently managing Eskom, but also those who are leading our government, the Ministry of Public Enterprises, but also the Ministry of Resources and Energy. Our view is that they would have highlighted in the past their intentions to privatize energy provision in the country. And the warnings, which they even included in the white paper on energy in 1998, showed that there would be at a later stage the increased population, which would necessarily increase demand on energy. And as a result, Eskom has to be prepared to be able to meet that energy demand when population grows. And we will see from 98, 99 until 2006, but also maybe this point, the first point which they also highlighted there, which I must not forget, is that they wanted to introduce competition in the generation division of Eskom itself. So in other words, what they are currently bringing through the independent power producers is what they would have planned a while back. But in the process of doing that, they would have neglected building generation capacity for Eskom, hoping that they will rope in independent power producers who will eventually ensure that the Eskom electricity needs in the country are met. But what would have happened in the early 2000s, because capitalist enterprises are always driven by profit, what would have happened is that they were looking for these investments to come from outside. But because of the historical efficiency of Eskom at the time, the electricity, the cost of electricity in the country was so low. And it was so low compared to the international tariffs on electricity. And as a result, it could not attract the necessary investment from private producers. And that is the reason why you even see the exponential growth in the electricity tariffs, because what they are doing with that also is to try to attract these independent power producers into the grid to invest in the electricity generation in the country.
But what relevance is that history, though? I mean,
it's completely irrelevant.
We are where we are right now. Should we be dealing with what we're confronted with right now?
No, it's completely irrelevant, because we have to understand what resulted in the situation that caused Eskom to have the multiple crises that it's facing today, the crisis of its debt, the crisis of generation capacity and load shedding. And as Trevor indicated, boils down to effectively a couple of key points. One, it was the 1998 white paper that put a moratorium on Eskom generating any additional capacity until bad investments of Medupi and Kusile. And with this bad investments, You have it with international finance institutions, including the World Bank, who's given what is effectively a corrupt loan to Eskom, which we'll have to pay back over the next 100 years. So part of Eskom's financial crisis is because of this. Part of the fact that Eskom can't produce sufficient energy today is related to this. Then Trevor makes a second very critical point, which is the adoption of the corporatization of Eskom in 2001, where Eskom, which is a public utility, must then act like a private company. And when you put this in the context of mass unemployment and gross inequalities, end users are actually unable to pay. So while it's important to think about those who are using tons of electricity to reduce wasteful energy, it's not going to be enough to meet the energy shortfall. And there's so many people who are load shedding themselves already because they can't pay for it. So when you bring this bad investments, the fact that most people can't really afford to pay for energy, and then increased demand for energy over time, as you see the introduction of the IPPs after 2011, it basically creates the process of the Eskom death spiral. This is a manufactured crisis. It's not a crisis that's unique to Eskom. In fact, it's something that's occurred to most public utilities around the world following the adoption of neoliberalism. And so that's why we have to roll back these problematic developments that created these crises to be able to ameliorate them. Otherwise, we won't be able to have long-term energy security. In fact, as we see greater private sector and more competition in the energy sector, will actually accelerate this death spiral, as you see, especially the energy intensive users group, who are about 30 corporations, state and private, who account for about 40% of the total energy consumed in the country. And as they shift to private embedded generation, that means a huge amount of demand is reduced. While Eskom will still have to pay above cost prices for excess supply from this private sector energy producers, even when Eskom has enough energy or if there's not enough demand in the future. And at the same time, Eskom will have to cover all the costs for the investment in the infrastructure for the development of renewable energies. These costs are not considered when spoken about the shift to decarbonize, which once again, AIDC, SAFTU, and many others feel that it's critical that we do to address the problem of climate change. But in fact, and I should end here, whilst there's many other points to raise, not only does, and we can show why, not only does government's proposals put our whole energy system in jeopardy, it actually also puts the possibilities of decarbonizing the South African energy sector at risk, given our research on the unfolding situation and problems of the for-private renewable energy sector globally.
Charles, do you have a problem with the heavy energy users group? The fact that, I mean, they actually have the capacity, I'm speaking to them next, to bring in more into the grid. Shouldn't that be welcomed?
We have a problem, first and foremost, in relation to privatization of state-owned enterprises and any smuggling of enterprises through the back door of these independent power producers introduced in the generation division of Eskom is problematic. And we must at least try to elaborate why is this problematic. The first point we make is that, you see, the problems of, and I will always come to this, the problems of the capitalist enterprises, which are predicated on profiteering, would present us with many long-term problems. But the short-term immediate problems, which we already see, For instance, Vusiswe Mabuso wrote an opinion piece on the Business Day yesterday. And in it, actually, she reveals that these people are not going to, because what we're sold as a public is that the competition between these independent crop producers will push prices down, and as a result, the cost of electricity will go down and be cheaper. But that is not true, because what Vusiswe actually showed there is that they went to bid in the tendering for bid window 5 with 43 cents per kilowatt per hour, right? But immediately after that, they are now crying that the costs of assembling input costs, it is actually at about 44% higher than what they've bid with. Now, as a result, they are going to demand increases on the unit cost of electricity they are selling to Eskom. And of course, that will be factored into electricity prices which are sold to consumers at the end of the day, which will lead to a consumer prices skyrocketing. This is the first part. The second part is in the long term. In the long term, you see, once they dismantle Eskom by decommissioning some of its coal fleets, and eventually the generation market is dominated by the independent power producers, what you will then have is that because capitalism has a tendency of concentration, eventually these smaller bidders who are currently competing amongst one another will be swallowed by one or two oligopolies, and eventually those will be the price makers. And instead of having a public entity that is a monopoly, you will have a private entities which are monopolies and oligopolies. And as a result, price makers always, by interest of profit, will always shoot up the roof the prices of electricity for the consumers and the working class.
Chairman, unfortunately, we're out of time. We're going to leave it here for tonight. Thanks to both of you for coming through. Dominic Brown from the Alternative Information Development Center, and of course, Trevor Shaku from SAFTU, the Union Federation. Now, many of you will recall the announcement President Cyril Ramaphosa made over a year ago with a great deal of fanfare. At the time, the country was experiencing stage 4 rolling power outages. Ramaphosa announced a 100-megawatt cap for embedded generation from the 1 megawatt threshold that was applicable at the time. The move was widely welcomed. But what has happened since? Well, Fanele Mondi is the CEO of the Energy Intensive Users Group. He joins me on the line. Mr. Mondi, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. What has happened since?
Good evening, Vuyo, and your listeners. Yes, it's true, the points you are making. I think in terms of the licensing versus registration requirements, we have seen since the president in his latest energy plan announcing that even that limit of 100 megawatts now is being removed. There is currently a consultation process in place now in terms of a Schedule 2 to make that effective with a legal instrument. So there is that progress. But overall, the overall picture in terms of what has been happening is that the office at the presidency called Vulindlela has been trying to remove some of the barriers which have been slowing down these projects. Some of those were around the environmental authorizations, which were taking far too long. They were around Eskom connections, specifically regarding the preparatory work, like the budget codes. Those time have now since been reduced, as well as even the part about the registration. When it was first implemented, the registration didn't really make much of a difference from a licensing requirement, but NESA has since reduced that down to 45 days. And at best, they have been able to perform even at far below that, at 19 days. So there is a bit of progress in terms of that. But also coupled to that are other developments which are happening in the industry, which the consumers are starting to own up. We are seeing that pipeline of projects now growing quite significantly. For instance, in our membership, we are recording over 4,000 megawatts now of those projects, which will be running or rather start delivering in the next 12 months onwards. But to develop the project itself, we are still talking about close to 18 to 24 months. But some of this work has since been started now.
Is it unfair to say that this process is still moving very, very slowly, notwithstanding what you're saying is happening under Operation Vulindlela in the president's office? Because, for the kind of crisis that we are facing, and these big announcements are made, and more than a year later, you're hardly seeing very real movement. Is it unfair to say this is painfully slow, this whole process?
I think it's not moving as fast as we would all like, especially with regards to the crisis we are facing. But there is definitely not a lack of effort in terms of moving those things. For instance, the president announced what was called one-stop, solution, meaning which instead of going through various departments trying to understand the necessary authorization, now you will soon have a system where everybody, or you can get into one point and your project is taken forward from that position. But yes, it is true. The point you are making is that it is not as fast as we see, but we are starting to see traction, though.
Do you get a sense, though, that everyone who has a role to play actually thinks, or are you all on the same page that we have a crisis, so we need to deal with this problem differently from the way we've dealt with it, all along? Is there that sense, or is it just business as usual? And I'm asking this because, I was looking earlier at the reactions to the president cutting short his visit to, he was due to go to the United States and has now decided to come back to the country. And a lot of people saying, it's another gimmick, because these people aren't thinking with an emergency and a crisis in mind.
The reality of the matter, Voyo, is that this thing is going to be with us for probably another year to two. Irrespective of what happens now, there is no magic switch, where you can just switch and then everything takes place. But yes, we agree that there is a need of putting more urgency in terms of action. The president, when he announced the emergency, the energy plan, it was quite clear that he acknowledges that there is a crisis, so much that the team he has assembled to look into this is called National Energy Crisis Committee, meaning which there is a realization that we have a crisis. But are we getting the speed we want? I think everybody is trying to work at that level. Andre de Ruyter, the CEO of Eskom, was yesterday indicating that they meet weekly with the government officials through the NECOM every Sunday. So in my view, that's an indication that yes, there is a will, but the traction may not be as high or as fast as we would like it to be.
Now, assuming that people are going to act with more urgency, with more speed going forward, assuming that whatever is happening under Operation Vulindlela, will pick up speed. Are your members geared towards one? Of course, they'll be generating electricity for themselves, but we expect the surplus to then come onto the grid. If the bureaucratic and other things were to be, the bottlenecks were to be cleared, are your members geared towards, assisting and delivering as this regime is expected to, if things were to go according to plan?
Maybe let me correct something. In terms of self-generation, our members will be, by nature, self-generation is for own use. We do not anticipate any of the members who can be able to produce in excess of their current consumption, which means that we do not expect any of the members to really leave the grid. So in most cases, you're talking about people building somewhere around about 20 to 30%, but obviously over time it will start increasing, but the grid will remain. The advantage of that for the national grid is that if you remove that 30% they were consuming, it means that that energy now is available for the rest of the population. So it's not going to be necessarily an issue of selling what is in excess per se, except for certain time periods. However, when it comes to the IPPs, because some of these projects will be developed directly by our members for their own purposes, but they will also go to contracts with IPPs who will develop these projects. In that particular case, you may have an IPP, for instance, developing, say, a 250 megawatts project with a power purchase agreement with one or two customers of 150 megawatts, in which case then there could be 100 megawatts. And by all means, the bureaucrats have got to be cleared to make sure that that 100 megawatts can feed into the grid. So I think those issues are out there for consideration.
Mr. Mundi, CEO of Energy Intensive Users Group, let me thank you for your time and insights. Well, after the break, Mmusi Maimane on wanting to be the country's next president. Welcome back. Former DA leader Mmusi Maimane has re-entered the political ring with a firm focus on becoming the country's next president. Well, how does he plan to do it and how? Mmusi Maimane joins me on the line. Remember, you can join the conversation by sending us your tweets. The handles are on your screen, Vuyo_Mvogo and at the Watchdog SABC. Good evening, Mr. Maimane. Thanks very much for your time. You obviously don't think that the space is crowded as some people think.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to fellow South Africans. I think none of us can deny this country finds itself in a deep crisis. You've just spent the last while discussing the energy crisis. I think we can't falter the fact that we've got an unemployment crisis. Most citizens in this country don't feel safe. Most young people are not getting through school. And more crucially, we have a government that's not working. And so we could all either sit on the sideline or we could simply roll up our sleeves and say, together as South Africans, how do we bring about the change? And I certainly believe that we have a vision for this country. I believe that this country can be the best it can be. And on current evidence, it's clear that we have a political problem, we have an economic problem, and we have a social problem. And I certainly want to put a political party on the table that will respond to this crisis at a time such as this one for our country.
How will it be different from anything that we know, your former political home, the DA, the ANC? How will yours be different from the parties we've come to know?
Yeah, I think, Vuyo, that's a very important question. You know, politics is a contestation of ideas and ideals. And we will be bringing ideas to this country that say, how do we reform education? You know, no one ever thinks about alternative models of education that could allow our kids to get through. We'll be looking at even the economy and what sort of reforms we can bring in there. So there's a policy conversation that we need to bring on the table. The second is that I've always maintained, and it's been my consistent message, is that how do we empower communities and make sure citizens participate fully in their democracy? And so therefore we will be going back to communities and make this crucial component of democracy. It's not unique only to South Africa, but it's a global phenomenon. And thirdly, we hold the absolute view that we are looking, and I want to work with the best in the country. The best may, at this current point in time, be in the various political parties and communities. I want to bring them together because I think for all of us, we've often sat at our homes and wondered what's going to happen after 2024. But I want to say to people of South Africa, we dare never fear change. Change is good in politics. We need to be able to allow ourselves to transition. And I want to bring about the best, not only in Parliament, but in Cabinet, so that we can build a government that's competent to deliver on the objectives of this country.
Do you think South Africa is ready for anything that will be new, and whether that new thing can actually, be able to beat the big parties that we currently have. I mean, because I'm asking this because if you look at the pace, of things, even those who continue to grow at a much slower rate after they would have introduced themselves onto the scene. So it would seem to me that it's going to take a while, a long time actually, for anybody to be able to change what we currently have significant. In other words, new entrants will continue to chip away, from the support of those who are currently big or bigger, but not at the pace that you would need to be able to, make very significant inroads.
No, I think first and foremost, we've done our research. There are 5 million voters who are available. They sit and they're asking the question, what is the alternative? Even still today, with all the parties that are involved, citizens are still asking, we need an alternative. So I think there's a healthy appetite for new. The second is, I think you'd be foolish to want to say that one particular party is going to beat the ANC and get over 50% or whatever the case might be. I think the question we must say is, how do we frame coalitions come 2024? The issue at core is what kind of leadership you offer towards that. And having worked not only in the official opposition, but having come from the ANC and having worked with coalitions in 2016, part of the reason I'm running is to be able to bring about that expertise and competence to bring people together, make sure that we run a government that's formidable. And then secondly, managing coalitions. I think South Africans, we need to get used to the idea of coalitions. They're good for democracy, they're good for accountability, and they certainly work, in my humble opinion. And so we're going to practice it a few times, but we will get it right. So here's the big trick, is I think come 2024, we captured that imagination of that 5 million South Africans. That's the job that we've got to do, and ensure that all the other respective parties do their job so that we can form a very competent government. So I'm not sitting here naively saying it's going to be 51% and everyone is going to win. What we are running out of time of, though, which is the point you're trying to make about the pace, is that I'm not convinced, Vuyo, that if we just simply allow status quo to continue past 2024 without any change, that South Africa is going to be on a better trajectory. I think that any political party worth its salt knows it needs accountability, and if it doesn't deliver on employment, it must be held accountable for that. So in truth, we can't sit here and say 2029 is a guarantee. We are all under pressure. We are all worried. South Africa is in a very difficult space. What we've got to trust is to say change is what corrects that, and all of us must work together towards that, and not simply fear that anything chaotic would happen if the ANC was to lose. We must rather simply be saying, actually, democracy enjoins us to be able to vote for change, to allow for a new government to come in place. And maybe some of it might contain the ANC, but at the end of the day, it builds a change in our country for our future.
Well, I mean, the parties you've come from relied a lot on a well-oiled and up to a point fairly well-financed background. If you look at both the DA and the ANC, of course, I mean, their fortunes are changing very fast. There's not a lot of money to go around, but they can still, depend a lot on the human resources that they have. Even when the ANC is not paying its people, it can still rely on them to put together a conference, to electioneer, and so on. And across the country, I mean, the finances are dwindling. I mean, people are experiencing tough times, so they're not keen to part with the little that they have. What are you going to rely on going into 2024? Do you have the people who will volunteer, their services? Will they be prepared to sacrifice their last pennies for what you believe in?
Well, I think, Will, what you saw post the story in the Sunday papers over the weekend, and certainly as we prepare towards the launch, is the overwhelming sense of readiness for South Africans to roll up their sleeves and work. I think politics is made expensive when we run out of a partnership with communities. Citizens know what they want, and citizens are willing to sacrifice to get what they want. The history of this country is fought by citizens who actually committed sacrifices. They marched without money. They organized without money. And so if we're going to make money the only provider for political change, then we might as well say it will become an elite sport for only a few. Money is necessary, but it cannot be the only determinant. What we've got to do is get back to engaging citizens. I think our people know what they want. I think if we work with them, if we partner with them, and I'm encouraged, I really believe, as I saw, even in the 2021 elections, we went to communities, we saw people actually back their own leaders and say, can you stand up for an election, I'll support you. With very minimal finances, they elected a number of people. If we do that at a national level, again, targeting the very 5 million citizens who, like you and I, are sitting somewhere going, we are non-racial as a people. All we want is a job in every home. We want a healthcare that works for us, our kids to be educated. I am convinced with a little bit of contribution they make and ultimately turning out to vote and mobilize in their communities, we'll be able to bring change in this country. This is the moment, and I think we dare not miss it.
Let's see if we can take a couple of tweets. We have Sianda Waltamda saying, it seems like becoming a SA president is very cheap these days. It's almost laughable. There is no way Mmusi Maimane can lead the country. He fails to address the simplest of issues that face small communities. He must focus there first. Do you have anything to say to Sianda? Mmusi?
Yeah, look, I mean, like in any other format, and I think ultimately my track record can show what we've done. Not only have we run successful political parties, we've certainly run a community engagement, but it's not only that for you. I want to demonstrate the fact that even we've run an education center that allows for young people to study. We've been able to set up even micro businesses that help people empower. I have been an activist in the last 3 years, and I'm saying if we take this opportunity to do this countrywide, I am confident that we can see an economy that grows at over between 3 to 5%. We can sort out this load shedding issue, which I believe all we need is about 2 years to do that, because we need the political will to be able to achieve that. And ultimately, when we get through those things, we can achieve an economy that works. And so, like anybody, you're going to have some people who do not like you, but I'm inviting South Africans to trust and to believe in the vision, and let's work together to bring change.
Well, here's someone who, it appears, likes you and trusts you. Registered to Vote ZW says, this man has leadership qualities. South Africans should give him a chance. What do you think you have going for you, that which presumably no other leader currently provides?
You know, Will, there's a famous quote that says it's the man in the arena, and I've been in the fight. I've tasted victories and I've tasted defeats. I've suffered in very difficult places. I'm a child of this country. I grew up in Soweto. I understand, I have a qualification that allows me to have at least an understanding of economics, but more than anything, I have a conviction that says, how do I best serve this country? And I will give my life to that. And so ultimately, this is not about politics for me. It's about ultimately saying this is the country of our birth and let's do it as best as we can. And I've shown the fact that both in highs and lows, we've been able to stay the course. And I think all South Africans ask is a leader who's stolen none of their money, is a leader with a vision for them, and a country that says, can we invest in the future of this country together for all people? And I think one of the other difficult things that we've seen in our political leadership at the moment is that it seeks to divide people on racial lines. You know, you end up with parties that are for this race or that race. I want to bring everybody together, black and white. And I think that's testament not only to my own family, but it's testament to the fact that as a descendant of a Xhosa mother and a Tswana father, we are diverse to be able to bring the nationalities and the diverse cultures in this country.
And the vehicle that you'll be using?
Obviously, we're launching this political party on Saturday, and so I'm wanting to invite you and invite South Africans to join us in Naledi in Soweto, where we'll communicate more, names, all of those things. It's going to be a festive day. It's on Heritage Day, and it's about saying, what heritage did we have and what heritage do we want to leave for future generations?
And that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thanks very much for your time, and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Musi Maimane, former DA leader, now ready to launch a new vehicle for his political ambition. And that vehicle will be launched, as you heard, this coming weekend. That's our show for this evening. To join us again tomorrow night.